Hello and welcome to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes, where we discuss the latest in the Sri Lankan business and economic landscape. I am Tharindu Amarasekara. The healthcare industry, which is something that has been in the forefront of so many economic and business discussions around the globe, especially due to the pandemic. Where is the Sri Lankan healthcare sector and especially the digital pharmaceutical sector? Because let's face it, people all around the world are now much more concerned about their health more than ever before. In a situation like this, with frequent lockdowns being a new norm around the world, isolations of certain areas also happening sporadically, where is the Sri Lankan digital healthcare and especially the digital pharmaceutical sector? Since people are unable to travel, they would prefer to order things online. But we all know a few years ago, ordering something online, especially medicine, was not the norm. And today we have a discussion with a pioneer in this field, someone who entered the industry at a time where ordering medicine via a mobile seemed quite alien. But today, that freakishly alien action has become a part of the daily lifestyles of Sri Lankan households and our citizens. So joining me for this discussion is Mr. Deeshana Basnayaka.
Thank you, Tharindu, giving us the opportunity to share some thoughts around this.
Deeshana, let's first talk about how big the online pharma industry is, because I believe that this has got a lot of attention over the last few months, especially after the pandemic, because when people are stuck at home, they have a concern, how will we get the food we need? And I would say even more than that, because usually houses would have somewhat of food stocks ready for a few days or weeks, but the bigger concern was, how do I get my weekly dose of medicine? Because this is a much more regulated area than just delivering food. But worldwide, how big is the online pharma industry and what do the numbers look like in general for the world and also for Sri Lanka?
Okay, it's a very good question, Tharindu. Before I address on the pharma perspective, online pharmacy per se, I would like to touch base how is the e-commerce by large in a global perspective.
For sure.
So as at 2019, the e-commerce market is about $3.5 trillion. So out of that, majority is skewed towards the West, and obviously China has a larger portion and followed in India.
China is even introducing their own digital currency now.
Exactly. So the anticipated growth in the e-commerce space from the inception stage, we'll say late 90s when Amazon starts to take that traction and eBay and so on and so forth. From that point, this point has taken quite a number of years, but in a very short period of time, like from year 2020 up to 2025, it will grow to about $5 trillion US dollars. So it has a huge potential to grow. But having said that, the number sounds very, very large, but looking at the consumption base, it's still about 18%. So there is a tremendous potential for it to go. So coming back to
I would say especially in the emerging markets, isn't it?
Emerging markets, even in the developed markets. For an example, that even developing markets, majority is coming from the developing markets. Emerging market percentages are quite small. So narrowing down to our market, Sri Lankan market, e-commerce space by large is still penetrated only 1%. It's very, very small. It's about 80 to 90 US dollars annum.
And if you look at even the cash and card or cash and digital transactions, you're looking at about 95% or more being based on cash.
Cash on delivery, I would say. Cash on delivery. Necessary cash on delivery is not physical cash. Sometimes your payment being done upon delivery. So people won't pay in advance for that. So it's about 1%. But with the pandemic, e-commerce space grew significantly. People understood how important and how convenient it is. So anticipating it to grow to 400 to 450 million US dollars in the next 5 years. So it's a huge jump. So as a market penetration, about 10%. So where online pharmacy fits there, it's something for us to look at. So currently looking at the market share, we are of course the leading service in the market on the online space. So it's about less than 0.1%. It's very small numbers. In a dollar term, if I may put it across, it's about $2 million per annum.
Understood.
So, but there is a tremendous amount of growth. But on the global perspective, how healthcare will grow, Now, I was talking to you about some numbers on the e-commerce space. So
Correct.
just to narrow it down to healthcare, it's about 300 billion US dollars per annum. It intended to grow to about 600 billion US dollars within the next 2 years. So which a very, very ambitious growth
Healthcare sector.
on digital space. So that digital space can be even an online pharmacy or certain services which
Like
they
remote
offer.
medicine, telemedicine,
Exactly.
etc.
But specifically coming back to online pharmacy per se, currently it is about 131 billion, mainly coming from China and the West, US and the European region. But India is taking a very aggressive jump on the online space. So online pharmacy is a very growing area, and for the last 4 years, the last 4 years, the investment for online pharmacy in India alone has about $240 million, but they're anticipating it to be invested and grow. Mainly investment by venture capital is going to be around $2.5 billion. So you can
lots
see
of interest
lot
in
of
this
interest
area,
was online,
especially due to the pandemic, isn't it?
Exactly, and people are finding it absolute. But there are some challenges also need to overcome. It's not like a typical e-commerce space. You rightly mentioned at the beginning of the conversation. So there are a lot of things that you need to do in the online space. So that is the current state on an online market.
But we have
locally.
come far from the days. For example, I remember when I was a young computer science student, just learning about the basics of the World Wide Web, trying to sell medicine online was frowned upon even in the developed markets.
Yes.
But we have come a long way from that, where today we see digital medium as definitely a potential partner for this
Yes.
healthcare pharmacy sector, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because the reason behind it buying medicines online, end of the day buying medicines online, you have prescription medication and non-prescription medications. I think a lot of online pharmacies in the West actually started with non-prescription medications like vitamins and supplements and etc., which you can just
Buy it over the counter.
over the counter medication. But when you get into prescription medication, there is a certain regulatory aspects. A doctor needs to prescribe it, and it has to be a valid prescription, and so on and so forth. And it cannot be, it needs to get validated before you procure and deliver. So those regulatory challenges is one which has a very slow growth in that, but because of the pandemic, I think everything just started to got speed up. I mean, take for an example the vaccines. Normally, a vaccine to come out, it takes about 5 to 10 years, but world did it in a very short period of time. So likewise, even revolutionizing some of these sectors has really speed up.
There's a very interesting headline in one of the leading global, I would say, newspapers, where they said the world's most loathed industry, or the most hated industry, because so many people point the finger at pharmaceutical companies saying you're minting money, etc. But they were the ones actually who came in as a savior and quickly did give a vaccine to the world in a very short period of time.
Yes, of course. I mean, these are all evidence-based medicines. So it's obviously everyone is in business. That's part and parcel of it.
Correct.
But of course, there is a much greater purpose behind it, helping improving the healthcare of an individual.
Deeshana, as you very correctly said, this is not like any other traditional retail sector just coming into the digital space. I mean, if you have a restaurant, you can start selling online. No one tries to interfere. If you have a, let's say, clothing store, you can start selling online. No one really tries to interfere. But healthcare, a crucial element of any economy. And obviously, already even the traditional healthcare models, traditional pharmaceutical models have a lot of government regulations connected to it, and there's a lot of monitoring, obviously for the welfare and benefit of the public to make sure nothing goes wrong. But when you're trying to do that online, I'm sure the complications are compounded. Tell us all about that. What are the key regulations that are there in place that anyone who is really planning to enter this sector needs to know about?
Yeah. When you're delivering medicines, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind. It's not just delivering a mobile phone or a computer accessory where you can just put it into a post and just deliver. Medications are very sensitive cargo, and also it needs to get properly authenticated. If someone is sending a prescription online, that has to be properly validated. So a professional needs to take a look at it and then validate the prescription. And when you're procuring it, also we need to make sure that we procure in the right way, and then also when you're delivering, we make sure that we maintain a certain level of temperature, because if you expose your medicines to different temperatures, it's bioavailability or the effectiveness in a simple terms starts to deteriorate. So when you consume it, it affects the patient's health condition because you're not getting your desired results that you're looking for. So when you're delivering, we really need to be mindful of like when you're procuring it from an importer or a local manufacturer, you transport it in a temperature controlled environment.
Correct.
Like an air conditioned vehicle.
And correct me if I'm wrong, that's why we see some of the vaccines that have been developed are not ideal for the Sri Lankan economy because it requires extensive cold chain facilities which we don't have.
Exactly. Now most of the medicines that if you can see even in a box it says it needs to be maintained 25 Celsius below. That's the room temperature in a cold country, or rather in most of the Western countries which produce these medicines.
Understood.
But in our parts of the world we know that it's just the most coolest time frame in the time,
for sure,
like November and December, still you have a higher temperature.
Understood.
So we have to make sure that we maintain those temperatures. So and when it in our stores, we have to maintain those temperatures. When we are delivering to the patient's doorstep, we deliver in such a way. So all these compliance processes has to be looked at it very carefully.
And I also believe that there are some regulations that say, especially if you are giving prescription drugs or medicine to a patient or a buyer, there has to be a pharmacist who is there, qualified pharmacy professional who is there. Am I right?
Yes. Everything is done by, obviously the prescription validation is done by a pharmacist, packaging and authenticating. But we use technology, how we communicate this to the customers to make it more convenient. And especially these days, when you're delivering, you have to also follow certain protocols and safety measurements and so on and so forth. So it's very challenging than you're delivering any other product for that matter. So
let's talk about ordering medicine online. Deeshana, are Sri Lankans ready to do that, cutting short the usual visit to the trusted pharmacists that they've been going for generations?
It is a big challenge. I have to admit it. I think one of the biggest thing is that when you build a relationship with the pharmacist, sometimes you're quite comfortable. It's like a doctor.
And in the local context, it's like the pharmacy uncle, the one you knew from your childhood days, the one who gave you the right medicine.
Exactly.
And you are challenging him.
Yeah, definitely. And at the same time, the consumer has a lot of questions in that point. So when you put a prescription online, they don't see it's been packed. They don't know what medicine's been packed. Obviously, they know when we send the right brands that they wanted, but they have questions that comes out. Are they importing it separately? Is it the same thing what I get from a normal pharmacy?
Is it genuine?
Is it genuine? Who is packaging? Is it a pharmacist packaging? So all these questions are in the consumer's mind. But I have to say, and I'm quite proud to say that with the very strict compliance processes that we have followed, to a certain extent we have overcome. So and it goes word of mouth. So the early adopters, we start talking about these propositions. So we kind of start to see the takeout and the conversions growing by 100% year on year, and the pandemic situation really boosted that. And now even the local pharmacies sometimes deliver the medicines to the doorstep.
We see them taking orders through WhatsApp.
Yeah, exactly. But not the most appropriate recommended way, because your information needs to get stored properly, data needs to be secured properly, cannot be shared, so all these things are being considered when we are operating in that way. I think that is the standard that we need to maintain.
What about due to let's say, some of the situations that have come up, we see, yes, as you very correctly said, people are going to buy medicine online. Do you see a difference of attitude between the more senior citizens and the senior Sri Lankans versus the more younger millennials? Are they more adoptive and are they more open to this idea of digital pharmaceuticals?
I would use the word senior citizens in terms of people who are not familiar with technology, because there are senior citizens who are really, really into technology and quite surprising, and we have seen those customers.
And they are willing to engage?
They are willing to engage, and they are quite comfortable to engage, and they like to be engaged and talk about it among their fellow members.
To be like a thought leader for
that. Yeah. So, I buy my medicines online. Why do you go to a pharmacy? They like to have that conversation. And secondly, I also like to say that we call the younger generation, we call it as a sandwich generation.
Sandwich generation. Now, that's a new term. Explain that.
So, what we meant by is an age group between 35 to 45, which they also have dependents in terms of their kids and the family they take care of it. And plus, they do also take care of their parents. So they are the ones who kind of very busy in their lifestyle. They are constantly in the corporate world, trying to achieve what they want to achieve, and these things are also come their way. So they need a convenient process to do that. So they don't want to just, on their way home, stop in a pharmacy and spend numerous amount of time and then find place to park and so on. So they are the ones who we teach to uptake this proposition, and we also saw that they don't have much of an issue in that. So they're quite engaging in that perspective.
And in terms of when they are engaging, especially maybe senior citizens, when they are engaging with this kind of technology, ordering medicine online, do you see certain concerns about data, about technology coming into play? Some people are worried to, I would say, give their credit card numbers over a device. How have these issues evolved, especially in terms of the pandemic situation?
I would say, say 5 years ago, it was quite a significant issue. But I think the market has matured a lot in terms of digital payments. There are so many digital payment mechanisms people are obtaining it. So we offer the same standards. Like putting your card, store your card, and then no sooner you process the transaction, it automatically deducts your card. People are quite comfortable with that. You see a growth in that. But yes, 2 years ago, it was quite a problem for them. But far as you order online and you pay at the time of delivery, I think that problem is mitigated to a certain extent.
Understood.
Yeah, but the risk is actually, if I pay in advance, if they send me a substandard product, what is going to happen to my money?
So, but I believe the government also requires there to be a proper refund policy and a proper policy for addressing customer grievances.
Of course. I mean, ICTA is doing a lot of work around data security. I think they're going to come out with something very significant, international standards. So everything is going to get streamlined. Even the payment side, I think it's very much streamlined by central bank, and there are so many payment gateways, which is very highly recommended and rather, I would say, approved by central bank. So a lot of people are quite comfortable with that.
Noted.
Yeah.
What kind of government policies do we need in order to strengthen this sector and the journey of the digital pharmaceuticals of Sri Lanka? Let's talk about that and more after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Our focus today is on the digital pharmaceutical sector. We've had so many episodes discussing different facets of digital healthcare. We spoke about telemedicine, which you might remember a few weeks back. But today, especially we are focusing on the digital pharmaceutical sector. This is a growing industry, an industry that has especially flourished worldwide due to the pandemic. But what's the situation of this in Sri Lanka? And what has the experience been by the players who are in the forefront of this industry in Sri Lanka and taking this industry forward to greater heights and at a much better strength? And joining me for this discussion today is a veteran, a pioneer, I would say, in the field of digital pharmaceutical in Sri Lanka, who is none other than Mr. Deeshana Basnayaka. Deeshana, let's talk about the experience during the pandemic time. The lockdowns came in, you can't go out, stay at home and do your economic activities. That was the message. Did you notice a flourishing rush of orders right at the start, or did it take a bit of a time? Was there some unique behavior you experienced? I see a smile and I'm quite sure there is a very nice story behind it. Well, tell us that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was quite a surprising experience for us. We kind of didn't anticipate that level of a surge in orders. Within a day, like no sooner, like especially latter part of March last year, no sooner the lockdowns have been announced, we saw a spike in orders which we couldn't even think of. It's significant, far significant, and we start to see numbers are going in thousands.
Did you forecast this kind of a situation back in 2019 when there were signs of a pandemic in Wuhan and in China and some of the other countries? Did you think it will come to this level in Sri Lanka? Was there a forecast?
Yes, I have to say.
But not to this extent?
Not to this extent. We also expected it to grow. People will be much more concerned about, because world is a very small place, and when you see what's happening, you see that if this happens here, that's the same thing. It's
I
going to
like
get
that statement.
replicated.
World is a very small place.
Yeah, so we always make a very conscious decision of looking at what really happened around the world on the healthcare space, adaptation, so on, because not like gold days, it's not going to take time to come. Good things and bad things all come at fast. So
one of the many negatives of globalization.
globalizations, right? So 30 years ago probably, or 40 years ago probably, a pandemic like this would have taken much more time to spread, but now it's, and that's the same time how it gets resolved also happens quite fast. So we anticipated some level of growth. So we planned ourselves, for an example, remote working, how we access urgent remote working. So we had a call center, we spread them around, we had their home working setups done, and but we never expect order numbers to go in thousands. So
Leaps and bounds.
a certain percentage going up, yes, suddenly if people ask to work from home, we are ready for it. So we also had home working structures being placed in the organization. So how we operate, how a pharmacist will function, so how we provide the transportation. So no sooner this was done, we were ready to take. So the day it was locked down was announced, only that day we were closed, the next day we were function. However, the order numbers were quite staggering, and we also see it really went up and it continued to remain in that. And we also start to see there is a lot of adaptation by the local pharmacies as well. We were closely working with NMRA at that time from the health ministry side also to help people, especially the chronic patients. They really got upset and they got really worried. How am I going to get my diabetic medicines? Because you cannot survive without it. It's a critical situation. So a lot of people step up to, local pharmacies also step out to it, and they couldn't even handle. And I also got to know like certain pharmacy chains, they were saying that they were getting orders in 10,000s. So it was a huge surge, and then no sooner everything starts to settle down, and we also start to see people start purchasing for longer period. They start purchasing for about 2 months, 3 months, and
In one go.
One go. So they were being proactive. Suddenly, if it discontinue for several months, I'm not worried because I have stock.
And I think we saw that at a more macro level as well. We saw some of the largest gloves and masks manufacturers in countries like Thailand having to shut down and say, look, no more orders until next year.
Exactly. And surprisingly, like we had one brand for hand sanitizers, and we had a reasonable stock within hand, and we also had a reasonable stock of face masks. We start to see the surge of face masks going up. But then we know it's amazing the level of resilience that people have shown in terms of suppliers to manufacturers to adaptation from the consumer point of view. There were so many brands have been starts to surge, and you can see like people just starts to produce in a very short period of time large quantities and supply. So while the demand is going up from the other side for online and digital space, we also start to see the logistical part is also stepping up. You can see some of the logistic partners are also becoming more agile and flexible. They step up to us, ask us, do you need some support? We can provide you more vehicles for deliveries and so on and so forth. So, and even the government's point of view, there was so much of things took place at that time, which also encouraging.
For sure.
And we managed to.
They were very swift in granting approvals for operating for a lot of
just,
digital
it's just
companies.
matter of hours of decisions. Quickly took part, and then we could execute. That's why I said the next day we were functional in full throttle.
Understood. But at the same time, I want to ask you now, you saw a surge, you saw a big demand.
Yeah.
Now, as the lockdowns begin to disappear and when the isolations are ending and the pharmacies are opening up, do you see a bit of a reversal of that, or is it a case where the people who came to online channels, they are continuing that journey, or maybe at least a majority of them are continuing that journey? What's your experience? Because let me tell you why I'm asking you this. When we had a chat with Sandun Hapugoda, he is an expert in digital payments, that was our very first episode of Bisnomics back last year. He very clearly mentioned, yes, we saw a surge in digital payments, but when the lockdowns ended, the trend was slowly reversing. What is your experience, Deeshana?
I think I will agree with him. We start to see a huge surge, as I said, mentioned earlier, but the good news is that it also it didn't retain at that level, but at a 50% it retained.
So that's something.
So say for example, if your market is functioning at say as a number, say your market is functioning at like 2, with the surge it went up to about 10, and it settled down at 6.
Which
So
is
you're
still good.
still there is a 4 growth.
Correct.
So that's something we start to say as a proposition, as a business, we grew by 200%. So, and we are retaining in that.
Noted.
And now more and more, because no sooner you got the hang of it, you got the trust bill, people starts to wonder, even our consumers trying, like, I don't feel like going to a pharmacy anymore. But still the pandemic threat is still revolving, though we see people are going into their normal lives, but that threat is there. So whenever they can avoid, they avoid it. So we see that growth is still happening among us.
Deeshana, I'm sure you heard of this concept by Michael E. Porter, famous economist and famous business strategy expert in the world.
One of my favorites.
Absolutely. For many of us.
Yeah.
The model about competitiveness of nations, the diamond model. And he clearly identified that supporting and related industries to be a key factor deciding the success of any industry.
Yeah.
If you take digital pharmaceutical, the way I see it, there are so many other related and supporting industries. For example, the telemedicine industry or the remote medicine industry. In your view, what are the supporting industries that you see for the digital pharmaceutical sector, and how strong are they worldwide and in Sri Lanka? Let's go into the details.
On the worldwide, I think I touched base few numbers earlier. That digital, or rather healthcare sector, if you take, and then you narrow it down, digital healthcare sector,
which is heading to about $600 billion.
600 billion. So in a very short period of time. So we are talking about the inception stage, whatever the stage that we are going to mark. It has taken whatever years, it can be decades or centuries for that matter.
Yes.
$300 billion.
Yes.
In a very short period, like 2 years down the line, it's going to grow up to about 600 billion. You can see the amount of capital being put into it, amount of focus being put into it. So when you narrow it down into collaborative healthcare sectors, it can be hospitals, it can be doctors engaging with patients digitally, telemedicine for an example, and pharmaceuticals being delivered to the doorstep, certain other healthcare things. People are also being very proactive.
Understood.
Right? Proactiveness is much more buzzing today than reactive. So people are very health conscious. If you take the sandwich generation I'm talking about, they're very health conscious. They do their regular exercises. They do go for their regular checkups to the doctors. They're very concerned about what they eat. Some people actually don't even eat in the night. They're very concerned about their health. So you see this kind of digital healthcare, how they engage with these factors, what kind of food they need to eat, how they need to balance their diet, and so on and so forth, digitally being taking place. So pharmaceutical industry versus digital side overall is taking a reform. It's not just one part of it. So we see this collective growth that we are talking about, it collaborating of all these factors that I just mentioned.
Correct.
So you can see the amount of emphasis being put. So pharmaceutical in terms of medicine delivery or engaging online is just one part of it.
Understood.
It has a holistic growth.
But even the other elements, like for example telemedicine, remote monitoring, these are also taking place in Sri Lanka and slowly being adopted by our citizens, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, let me talk about telemedicine, which is, I would say, has a very close relationships to us, because someone who is making a consultation on a video call with a doctor will also likes the prescription to be delivered to the doorstep through us, which we kind of do for most of these digital partners. And actually speaking, according to American Medical Association, they say that 80% of hospital engaging in a hospital can be prevented through digitally. Because first instance, what you need to do is to talk to a doctor, get the first indications, and ask the right questions. If you really need for the second investigations, physical investigations, you go to hospital. Because sometimes hospital acquired infection is quite large, and people are quite ignorant about it.
But especially now they are concerned about it.
Now it takes Sri Lanka for an example. If someone is in the hospital, the whole family goes, the relations, everyone goes, and they also...
Sometimes the whole village.
The whole village goes for it. It's absolutely unnecessary. I think pandemic gave us certain restrictions. Even the person who really needs to go to the hospital has to go through a tedious process. So visiting and so on. So telemedicine is something which is, prior to pandemic, people are talking about it, but people are not adopting that kind of behavior.
And sometimes it can be a lifesaver, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
rather than going to a smaller place or a medical center, then saying, no, you're about to come into a heart attack, go to another place. You consult the doctor through the phone.
Exactly.
Then they say, look, you go to the nearest big hospital because you might need this surgery.
Exactly. I mean, you have devices to kind of, you can take your temperature, you can check your heart pressure, you can check your glucose levels. All these things now you can digitally do and upload those information for a consultant to read the information. And then for further investigations, then you come to the hospital. So we see that part will grow, and now it's been forced. So people are also engaging a lot in that space as well. So we see that there is a growth in that area as well.
In my view, any industry that needs to flourish and grow and that has good potential to do so needs a proper government policy. In your view, Deeshana, what are the government policy decisions needed to strengthen the digital pharma sector in Sri Lanka, and be very open and candid about it?
Yes, I think it's a journey that everyone takes together, and especially a country like Sri Lanka, which is an emerging market, adopting digitalization and so on. So we are also in the learning process. So
Deeshana, just to stop you in your tracks there. Now, you did mention, yes, we are an emerging market, but at the same time, we see much more potential for growth in digital services and the digital economy in the emerging markets than sometimes in the developed markets, isn't it?
Of course. I mean, it's quite surprising. See, a question that I always ask on a daily basis, if you take mobile penetration in Sri Lanka, I mean, let's bring that from that point to
Correct.
what we're going to talk about. Mobile penetration in Sri Lanka is more than 130%.
Every person has more than one phone, that means.
Exactly. And smartphone penetration is more than 65%.
Getting close to 100.
100. So, and so that means broadband connection is about 30 or 40%. So every household has a broadband connection. So digitally engaging part is quite high.
And this also, I would say, creates an opportunity for a developing economy like Sri Lanka to, I would say, maybe leapfrog a few years of development and match with the other regional big boys.
So one of the things that I would say, coming to that specific question, is that what the government needs to get is to give standardized processes to these respective industries. So it will not only protect the players in the market, but also it protects the consumer by large. I'll give you back here with a good example. Now we follow a very strict compliance processes directly given by the government to us to follow these delivery mechanism process. And we also have adopted data security standard, which is like the GDPR standards in terms of data security. But a regular pharmacy also wants, I can get an order from WhatsApp and get it delivered. They don't follow any of those standards.
Correct.
So then you play at a different level in the market. Those things has to get regularized.
And the value for the industry also kind of deteriorates at that point.
Yeah, because when these guys makes mistakes, the person who is really doing in the right way also get a bad name.
The entire industry gets the black mark.
Yeah. So I always try to make this phrase that in a ethical market, right, it's very easy to become unethical, but in an unethical market, it's very difficult to become ethical.
Quite a paradox situation there.
So that's the challenge that we sometimes, so where the government's intervention should be in that sense. Understood. So like when you're going on the road, like if you're really following the rules and driving on the lane, you suffer a lot.
Absolutely.
So similarly, in the business environment, especially on this space that we find a lot of things. But of course, it's ICTA is also moving towards that standardization. I think we need to give a little bit of more time, and things will look much better.
So the signs on the horizon are looking good.
Very positive.
Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Digital pharmaceutical industry, a key component of the overall macro level digital healthcare sector. Sri Lanka has so many enterprises that have taken steps towards venturing into this sector, but where is this industry right now and what is the way forward? This is the focus of today on Bisnomics, and joining me for the discussion is Deeshana Basnayaka. Deeshana, I strongly believe all the strategies, all the plans will fail completely disastrously when you don't have proper execution of them. I don't know whether you agree with me on this one.
Of course.
But especially in the digital pharmaceutical sector, I believe the execution of the plans is even more crucial because there are so many factors that needs to be considered. In your view, especially from the logistical aspects, I know we did touch upon this before, but let's get into the more details. If someone is planning, if a business decision maker, an investor or a professional is planning to enter into this digital pharmaceutical sector, from a logistical perspective, what steps need to be taken to ensure the quality and the safety of the transportation of medicine, number one, and number two, from a data management and data protection front, what are the key areas to focus on? Let's hear it from your experience.
Coming back to the point of execution, I think, and plans, I think a plan is no good without execution. Right?
A plan is only as good as how well it's executed.
Exactly. So, and also rather than being right, it's also important being effective. So when we are looking at this digital propositions and logistics, in particular, the point that you just raised up, and data security, there are a lot of discussions and plans are being set up, but execution is not happening in that level of importance. So there's some other things that we kind of trying to push very silently. I think it's one of the concerns that I'm being very empathetic about from the other side, looking at the other side. It's the resource allocation for that kind of a structure is also quite significant, and also certain things will take time to move forward because there are so many institutions get involved in these processes. But what we also have taken is a conscious decision on this process, is that some of the things we cannot wait until others tell us to do. So what we do is we take a very tested model which is in a developed country. So we always look up to the standards which is made in Singapore.
Singapore?
Yeah.
Do you think they are like a trendsetter in this sector?
I would say, right? Because Singapore is always a very tough market to penetrate or even function, because their regulations are quite strict and so on and so forth. So what we do, and we take, as I said earlier, we follow the GDPR compliance process.
General Data Protection Regulation.
Exactly. So
that's mainly for the European markets, but
exactly,
it's a good model to be followed here.
Good model to be followed. So when we have a tested models, right, you just follow that model, and we put our infrastructure, we do follow the process. Yes, there is you have unfair competition around that, but that's fine, because eventually, yes, it's a cost for you, it's difficult for you to maintain some of these expenses, but subsequently you will gain better relationship with your consumer, better standards, and subsequently you will win.
You win the trust of the stakeholders.
You win the trust of the stakeholder. And also sometimes you may handle tens of thousands of customers. You just need one or two customers to make things miserable for you. I'm not doing it sake of that. I'm doing it because that's the right steps that you need to follow. And
if you do the right thing, you'll end up at the right place.
You will end up at the right place. So it's now we talk about Michael Porter, right? One of the famous quotes that he said, that strategy is not all about doing stuff. It's about collectively doing right things, and you have an advantage over someone else. So as a business, we have taken those conscious decisions. So how we do things right, sometimes consumers don't even give a damn about it, right? But doesn't matter to us. Sometimes the consumer comes to us, just want a simple discount and get it delivered. I don't care, whether you maintain these standards, but doesn't matter. But far as we follow that steps,
correct,
that builds the right attitude. Because if you take a country, that's where it also heads. Like even if you don't lead in that way by an example, everyone will not follow that. Oh, they're also going to do it.
I read this very valid quote once that said, with every shortcut you take in your business, you're actually cutting short the success of the company.
Of course. Sustainability, right? So you really need to look at sustainability, and it's, I have to say, I'm not very proud to say that. By large, Sri Lankans always look at short-term gains.
Very myopic.
Very, very short-term gain. They are always looking what I can get, do something and get something.
What's in it for me?
Yeah, and also There is a very close friend of mine who kind of lived overseas throughout the years. He said that Sri Lankans pay a significant amount of money for a substandard service. You get what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely.
Right? Everything is very expensive, but you get a very substandard service. The same amount of money you will spend in a different country, you get a much better service, and they take responsibility for that service. So that is what we want to take to account. If it comes to pharmaceuticals, it's price control. So you have a you have given the margins for you. So all these things that we are doing,
you don't have much to play with.
You can't increase the price and give that a service to a customer, not like a clothing shop.
And we have seen where some retailers or other e-tailers that try to do that falling into trouble.
No, you can't sustain it. Giving that kind of things, you can't sustain it. So we try to look at the long journey. Short term, yes, you go through a tough time, but you sustain yourself in the long run.
Understood. Let's talk about the expat community and the relationships maintained with them, because I believe you get a lot of expats, like Sri Lankan expats living abroad, who want to make sure their loved ones here are taken care of. All this while, it would have been a huge concern as to how can I get them the medicine, are they getting the right medicine, is it of the right standard. But then comes in digital pharmaceuticals, a sector where they can engage with and make sure their loved ones are looked after. What has been the response from the Sri Lankan expat communities of overseas towards digital pharmaceutical in Sri Lanka?
Very positive, very, very positive. Actually, it's coming as a blessing. I think it's one of the most satisfactory thing for me on a daily basis, because they're working hard for their loved ones, and when they want to send their medicines to their mother or the father or their kids or their wives, they use our platform. So they're quite pleased with it, and they're very happy about it. And we actually didn't push so hard on that area at the early stages. Actually, beginning of this year, 2021, we're going to take a very aggressive approach to it.
And maybe expand to those markets and make your name known more.
Yeah, so we want to take a step-by-step approach, because one of the things that we really looked at in that angle, as the point that we discussed earlier, right? The security side of it, all these things, these guys look at.
Correct.
So we also wanted to bring those standards in advance and start pushing it further, right? So there is a huge offtake. No sooner we start to push this segment.
And in terms of their communications, I mean, are there any stories that you like to share with us, Deeshana, where they've been, let's say, at your, sometimes, let's say, without you, they would not have been able to look after some of their loved ones? Have you had such experiences?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there are a lot of stories around it. I mean, they'll send us emails thanking. They send us messages thanking. I mean, they're blessing us for the service that we have done, because some of these, and especially with the pandemic, some of these senior citizens are scared to go out, and especially on the chronic space. If you're a diabetic, if you have any other illness,
like heart conditions,
you're extremely vulnerable for COVID-19.
You need that medicine on time.
So the mother who is staying at home saying the son or the daughter, I can't go out, I'm scared, and son like, how can you get your medicines? Then we come into play, and we deliver it, and they are at peace of mind from where they are working and where they are resigning. Oh, my parents are getting the medicines, thank God, to so and so. So we kind of looked at it that angle, and they kind of find it very easy. And then we also made the process how they can even order in a very simple setup steps they need to follow.
Deeshana, along with your company or the organization you're attached to, you yourself as a young professional, you've made a remarkable turnaround in your corporate journey as well. You've been into different sectors, pharma, banking, and then now you've become a pioneer in the retail, I would say digital retail sector in pharmaceutical. We have lots of youngsters who are planning to maybe quit their job and start their own digital business, or maybe who are planning to enter this digital pharmaceutical sector in general. I would like to ask you as this last question for today, what is the advice? And please do go into depth, do share your experience, do tell them what you have to say. What do they need to know when they are planning to enter the field of digital entrepreneurship? Let me just keep it open like that.
I think there are several. I think I can talk hours about that because there's so much to talk about. But I'll concise it in a simple way. First of all, the question that you need to ask: why you start?
Start with the why.
Start with the why. Why you're starting it? Because sometimes people go with the trend. No sooner they come out from school or university, I want to start my own business. That's like, oh, my friend is doing it. I also want to do the same thing.
Or everyone is doing it.
Everyone is doing it. So it's a trending kind of a behavior.
Deeshana, correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of people hear about the plethora of new digital businesses that are starting up in Sri Lanka. But what a lot of people don't know is right on the other side, there's so many businesses which are just closing down because they had economic models that are no longer viable.
Exactly. I mean, I'll give you the startup numbers in a high level.
In Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, I mean, we have, in the last 2 years, we got close to about 500 startups which came along with trying to disrupt different industries. Just only less than 1%, 2% survives. Oh. In the first year, first 24 months,
the value of death.
Value of death. Because thing is that, as I said, you need to, when you're starting a business, one of the things that you need to find, when you're working for someone else or a different organization, you focus on that specific area, and you're defined what needs to be expected. So you don't need to focus on any other thing. You focus on your task and you deliver that part. But when you're going to start something on your own, you have a very 360 degrees approach.
A helicopter view of everything.
Exactly. And you being an entrepreneur, I know it's tough. So you really need to look at all these aspects. And when you're taking those aspects, you also need to understand the risk reward. And also you need to really understand your level of risk, what is your thresholds, and so on and so forth. And in that process, one of the biggest things that people don't understand, the level of resilience that you will have. What's the level that you can go? So when they think like every first 1 or 2 steps they take, oh, they're going to be successful. Wow, it's going to come to me. It's going to come to me. Sometimes they will also get carried away by the first 2, 3 results. Correct. They think like, oh, I got it. I know what to do.
I've cracked the code.
I cracked the code. I know what to do, and there you go on, right? And then the real stuff come into you. You don't know what to do, and you crash. So I think the advice is don't start something sake of starting it, unless you really understand what you're getting into. Before I started this, I mean, I have been in the corporate world for 20 years before I started. So I had so much of corporate experience, training, learn under tough leaderships, and gone through hard times, and also understood what is my level. If this doesn't success, what's the level that I can take? And also we did so much of research and learning and preparing ourselves while we were working in the corporate world to take this challenge. So that's one of the things that people are not willing to do. Sometimes you can get lucky and get very successful, but that's a very small percentage. So people, what they do, they will look at that 1% and they think, oh, it's going to happen to me as well.
It's easy.
It's easy. It never happens.
And at the same time, I believe anyone who is entering the digital entrepreneurship sphere, that means anyone who is planning to start their own platform or online website or online business model, I believe these days cybersecurity is a key focus. I would like to also ask you on a quick note, how important is it for the digital entrepreneur to be aware of all these cyber threats and attacks happening and being ready for it?
It's an evolving situation. It's moving so fast.
And we saw recently so many big corporates being hacked.
So fast. Like the digital space alone or e-commerce space alone, take healthcare for an example. In 2021, the healthcare knowledge doubled in 124 days.
In 2020?
In 2021,
okay.
The healthcare knowledge doubled in 124 days because of quantum computing.
Okay.
So what it means, that means that the more and more threats, more and more hackers and more issues are going to come. So your level of pace that you need to maintain is far significant than you can ever imagine. So I think you really need to understand, like say for example, if you're into digital space, one of the things that you really need to be mindful is about blockchain.
Blockchain.
Yeah, blockchain is something which is going to come. Every area, that's going to be the next growth for entire world. Like if you take about early 90s, you're talking about Microsoft coming and some of these
Big players.
big players, digital revolution coming into play, internet coming into play, e-commerce spaces are picking up. Blockchain is the next growth because of
it will be the backbone of all these developments.
The reason is that the whole world is going to get digitalized, and you need a secure mechanism. So you know, decentralized mechanism. So that's why if you're really looking at a e-commerce business or a digital business, you need to think on blockchain. If you don't think about it, that means you're not thinking far, because that distance is not too far. So maybe 10 years down the line, if you and I had this conversation, I would have said it, in 10 years down the line, this will come. But now I can say next month it's there.
Understood.
That fast it's going to come.
Deeshana, in terms of attracting investors for a digital business that one would start, because that's another plan. You start, then you find the right investors and you grow. What do investors look for in a young person's digital business model?
I think what I would
let's say, what would you look at?
That's what I'm trying to say. What I would look at is discipline and resilience, and also what I said, discipline. If you don't have the right level of discipline, you may have a brilliant idea, you might be a talented person, but if you don't have the discipline of executing it on a daily basis,
if you're not there getting it done,
and facing those hardships and still continue to move forward with that objective, then is no point. So that's what company is all about.
Basically, what you're saying is, don't ask me to commit to something that you're not committed to.
So then you can take to the next level. And also, both parties needs to be equally believed in what you're trying to achieve.
The synergy in thought.
Exactly. Someone may see a very their horizon can be very short-sighted. Some may have a very long horizon. So it's depending on the individual, depending on an institute who is going to invest on you, or an individual is going to investing on you. If they believe in you, the journey that you're trying to take, with that clarity, they will stick to you.
Noted.
If they don't believe in you, then you shouldn't be forcing somebody to come, because then you will lose that relationship in between.
So then what you're saying is the numbers, the forecast, the balance sheets, those come later.
Comes later. It is important.
Yes.
I mean, if you
but
don't,
not primary.
If you don't make money, that means if you don't make profits, you're not in business.
Correct.
So we need to understand. That's fundamental.
Correct.
But you have to also make sure that you do the first things right. Then you know your end result is going to be that very well.
For sure.
You know your result is going to be that.
The future of the digital pharmaceutical industry of Sri Lanka and the world. This was our focus today on Bisnomics. Not to forget, with some exciting advice for young digital entrepreneurs about what you need to know when you are getting into building a digital business model. Thank you very much, Deeshana, for joining us and sharing your valuable experience and thoughts, not only on the digital pharma sector, of which you are a veteran and a pioneer in this country, but also on general digital entrepreneurship. Thank you very much for taking time off your busy schedule and joining us. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Tarindu, for giving us the opportunity to share our thoughts, and I hope it was quite insightful.
Of course.
Thank you once again.
With that, we wrap up today's episode of Bisnomics. This is where we discuss the latest in the Sri Lankan business and economic landscape. I will see you with the next episode.